dá-lhe um pão e uma rosa para a fome saciar.
Pai nosso, que estais no céu, santificado seja o vosso nome. Venha a nós o vosso reino, seja feita a vossa vontade, assim na terra como no céu, assim na terra como no céu. O pão nosso de cada dia dai-nos hoje, ó Senhor. Perdoai as nossas dívidas, assim como perdoamos aos nossos devedores. Não deixeis cair em tentação, mas livrai-nos de todo o mal. Não deixeis cair em tentação, mas livrai-nos de todo o mal.
Good morning, everyone. We are very happy to have you here again with us for another talk, this time that will be given by our friend Humberto Schubert. As always, we like to start our meetings with a prayer. So we would like to invite you all to join us in a prayer, to close your eyes and start depicting the image of Christ, thinking about all the blessings we have been receiving on our day-to-day basis, and asking for protection and guidance, more in particular to our guest speaker today, Humberto, that we may learn from what he is going to be sharing with us, that it can lead us to meditate, to think about important behaviors that we need to start incorporating in our day-to-day lives in order to reach peace and harmony within ourselves. And with that in mind, we open our meeting today. So again, it's a pleasure to have Humberto here with us. Humberto Schubert is a lecturer in philosophy and currently visiting academic in the University of Oxford. He's also a volunteer in the Spiritist Society Primavera Brazil, editor of the Primavera Spiritualist Press, and author of books and articles on Spiritism, theology, and philosophy. And the talk we are going to be having with Humberto today is Evidence and Arguments for the Immortality of the Soul. I'm sure you're going to love Humberto, as all of us here in the Spiritist movement or that already know him are really appreciating the work that he has been doing and everything that he has been bringing to us. Humberto, welcome, and thank you so much for being with us today for this series of talks that we are having here in the United States Spiritist Federation.
Hi, greetings to everyone. I'm very honored to be invited by you, and I would like to thank Mrs. Korngold for the invitation. I'm very glad with it. And today we would like to address the subject of rational or evidential support for the idea of immortality of the soul. Also considering the arguments against the immortality of the soul, because we have to be fair, and if we claim to have reasoning about the subject and not only religious belief or an inclination to the subject. We have to strongly analyze the argument against what we are actually advocating. Now, the first thing I would like to stress is that evidence and rational arguments, they are very, very important in Spiritism. The Spiritism is not a religion in the ordinary sense of the word. It's, of course, a spiritual way of living, and it is a spiritual perspective about life. It leads to spiritual and religious experiences, but it is not a religion in the sense that it's based on dogma or on the authority of a prophet, a saint, or a religious leader, a revelator of some message. Now, that does not mean that revelation and prophecy and religious experience are not important. That's very, very relevant to stress, because religion is, now we understand it, is not in contradiction with science and with rational analysis. On the contrary, there is much harmony between religion and science and philosophical speculation. It was always so in history, because the founder of scientific thinking, all the founders actually, but especially Plato, the founder of scientific thinking and the founder of rigorous rational analysis, was extremely religious, very, very religious man, including with religious experiences. He had his own mystical or religious experiences, and he pointed to Socrates as one who also had similar experiences. So we can admit, or we can consider that to some extent religion is not disconnected, divorced, or even less in contradiction with science and rational thinking and reasoning. Now, religion is much older than science and philosophy. Philosophy is only 26 centuries old, relatively new and young compared to religion, which is ancient. From the beginning of civilization, we had religion as not as an organized institution with temples and so, but we had doctrines, we had claims, and we had a worldview, a perspective that could or should encompass every aspect of human life. From that time on, we progressed much as a race, as the human species, in the direction of progressively more and more rational thinking on the older religious subjects. It does not mean that philosophy assumed religious ideas and beliefs, but recognized and accepted that religion had some insights about reality. And according to these insights, we could proceed to rational investigations of the soundness, so to say, the logical support for this insights. The idea of the first philosophers was to explain the world, and the philosophers realized that the world included religious experiences and some sort of transcendence, some sort of demand for immortality. But while religion is very important, and we respect and we love religion quite a lot, we have to remember that philosophy works and proceed through rational reasoning, and it's more sound and persuasive, especially for those who are not religious people. So if you want to discuss with people and persuade them that the reality of the spirit and the reality of immortality, the reality of communication with deceased, what was previously understood as communication or apparitions of angels, demons, saints, entities, abstract entities maybe, or mythological creatures. Well, that process can be presented in a more persuasive way through rational arguments than through statements of belief, which are only persuasive for those who already had and hold such beliefs. Now, I would like to move to the first main argument for immortality of the soul. It actually did not originate from philosophy. It originated from religion itself, which is the argument of underlying cosmic moral order. According to this argument, in the beginning, very primitive, in a very or presented in a very primitive way. According to this argument, our lives do make sense because there is an underlying cosmic order that makes sense of our lives. Without that, according to materialism, for example, our lives end in an abrupt way, sometimes in a meaningless way, and that is very detrimental to the idea of purpose and sense of life. Now, very old religions like the Egyptian religion, the Babylonian religion, or the religion of the Sumerians, and the Greek religion, and also in India, and after that in Buddhism, through the idea of karma, we have some sort of instinctive demand for cosmic order. We have an instinctive demand, and when I say instinctive, I mean a rational demand, not a demand of our bodies or evolutionary demand or something of the sort, but we have a basic rational demand in the beginning, unconscious, that morality has to be fulfilled in an afterlife. That means if, as our basic perception tells us, if someone had a very, very bad moral behavior and a very, very good and rewarding life on earth, our reason demands that justice is made in the afterlife. The opposite is also true. If someone is remarkably good and loving and has a terrible life, something in our rational way of understanding life and the world demands from us that we speculate or that we project an afterlife where the good can be rewarded and the evil can be punished, or can lead to an automatic, like in karma, an automatic answer that leads to suffering and to sadness and so on. Now, philosophers love this argument. Since Plato in the Republic to Jean-Jacques Rousseau in his book on education, the Email, many philosophers, especially in the Enlightenment, they stress the importance of a cosmic order in order to make sense of life. Without that cosmic order, we could expect that goodness is not rewarded and evil is not punished or is not even controlled in any way, and therefore it is worth to be evil. It is worth to be ignorant and bad. This is a very strong argument, sometimes ignored by spiritualists, and we have this argument very, very strongly emphasized in Spiritism, in Spiritist teachings. Now, moving to the second argument in favor of the immortality of the soul, we have evidence. I say in my title, or in the title of my presentation, that we had evidence and argument, but actually evidence makes a case for a very, very strong argument that comes in this form. If we have strong evidence, strong empirical data and phenomena that suggest an afterlife, that suggest the presence of the spirits among us, then we can say that this idea of immortal souls, or the idea of survival to bodily death, is sound and is reasonable without recurring to religious belief. Now, the question is, which actually are the evidence that support or that suggest, like Jan Stevenson very cleverly put it, the evidence that suggests to be humble and not to claim that we have conclusive evidence, but the evidence that suggests immortality of the soul and the survival of conscience after bodily death. So we have actually a bunch of evidence, many sorts of evidence, from ancient to more recent perceived evidence. But we could start with apparitions of deceased and religious entities, such as angels, demons, mythological creatures, saints, and so and so and so. And interestingly, we have claims of apparitions in Catholicism all the time, in Protestantism all the time, people who claim to have heard or seen their relatives or other people or saints or the Virgin Mary or Jesus, and so and so and so. It's also very common in India. It's very common among African peoples of different cultural backgrounds. It is very common in shamanism of many sorts in Americas and also in Siberia, and it's very common in Buddhism too. So we have apparitions of ghosts since ever, everywhere. There is seemingly no culture that rejected it as something completely impossible before the more recent idea of science and scientific worldview of the last 120, 150 years. And we have to remember that even scientists, remarkable scientists such as Robert Boyle, claim to believe in this in this phenomena, and they believe that suggestive evidence for the immortality of the soul did exist. So it's not, as opponents claim, something that only happens among primitive cultures or among ignorant people and things of the sort, attacks of the sort, say. Now, we have also the out-of-body experiences and the near-death experiences, which quite the same thing. The main difference between them is that out-of-body experiences, they happen when we are in a good health state. while near-death experiences happen when we have heart attacks and when we are in coma or other similar extreme health conditions. But the process is very, very similar, and we have very, very ancient narrative about out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences from Apollon of Tyana. We have a slight suggestion in Plato's Symposium that Socrates could have out-of-body experiences. We have other more explicit suggestions of out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences in India. So this seems to be a very common phenomena, and more recent statistics about near-death experiences tell us that it happens in a very, very large number of cases. A significant portion of medical resurrections, they include out-of-body experience, or actually near-death experiences. But these cases are not always very strong. They may be resumed to a light, a tunnel, or an encounter with one specific person, usually a parent or a relative or someone that was loved and that was very close to the one having the experience. But some cases are very, very striking and very, very strong, actually. While when, for example, someone tells to the medical group, to the health team that was working with him or her while the person was without conscious, and the person describes very, very specific happenings and circumstances that could never be perceived by him or by her with closed eyes, without oxygen in the brain, and so and so. Now, another very interesting case and phenomena in support of the immortality of the soul are the suggestive memories of past lives. They can happen with adults, of course, but they are even more impressive when they happen with children. And the US is the main focus, the central place where this research is performed, especially in Virginia in the times of Stevenson. But after that, we have now a number of researchers, psychiatrists, psychologists who work with memories of suggestive cases of reincarnations or memories of past lives. And some of these memories, they do make very, very strong cases in favor of the existence or the pre-existence of our souls to this actual life that we are now having. We have one case of a boy, for example, in the US that remembers and that claims to have memories of a pilot of a warplane in the Second World War, and he remembered the address and very specific circumstances about his marriage, his family, and this case became a book that I just forgot the title now, but it's a relatively famous book that offers this strongest claim possible, one of the strongest claims that we had about reincarnation. In Brazil, we also have a book from Hermínio Miranda called I Am Camille Desmoulins. Camille Desmoulins was a French writer and a journalist in the time of the French Revolution. And this Brazilian journalist claims to have very specific memories of him as the French revolutionary Camille Desmoulins. It's a very interesting book. I'm not sure if we have it in English, but if not, we really should support for quick translation as fast as possible. Now, another interesting phenomena are the cases of dreams that allow us to experience, how can I say it, paranormal or parapsychological scenes, sights, and to receive information through parapsychological ways. Well, the ancient Egypt and the ancient Greeks realized that while dreaming and while sleeping, we could perform some acts that were not typical to our waking state, to our normal state of consciousness. And in this altered state of consciousness that we do not understand quite well, it could be actually sleeping, or it could be some sort of hypnosis or sonambulism that allowed for this very, very specific phenomena. And now we have in parapsychology techniques to deprive ourselves from our basic senses and to allow for the flourishing or the manifestation of more psychical and spiritual capacities. And we also know that it was performed or invented by the old Egyptians. For example, in the lexicon for Egyptology, which is a very important international lexicon, we have some references to rituals in old Egypt where people were conducted to a place with a pool, a sort of a swimming pool with salt, and they could float, and the place was very dark, very silent, and this absence of sensorial impact of sensorial stimulation on our minds allowed us to have improved psychical abilities and things like that. Now, evidence always existed, but it was only intensively researched in the times of modern spiritualism, especially in England and France and Germany, with people like Allan Kardec, Caldeprel, Zollner, the Baron of Schrenck-Notzing, and also in England, Frederick Myers and Henry Sidgwick, and many other, especially academics and scientists, sometimes physicists or physicians, or even classicists like Frederick Myers, that address the phenomena in a very empirical way, sometimes without coming to the necessary philosophical conclusions. That's one problem that can happen with purely empirical research, with purely evidential arguments. Not always, but sometimes people just forget, or they are afraid to move forward from evidence to the moral conclusions of this afterlife, or this support for the immortality of the soul. Now we come to another argument, a very strong argument for the immortality of the soul, which is the argument of the goodness of God, or God's love. According to this also relatively old argument, which is also a very very Christian sort of philosophical argument presented by many Christian philosophers, especially. According to this argument, God could not, as a loving Father, as a loving God that it is, God could not destroy us. It could not cancel our consciousness and our sentiments and eliminate everything that is there to us without empathy and sensitivity to our aspirations and our relationships and our capacities. Sometimes this argument emphasizes much the human capacity to perfection, to perfectioning ourselves and to flourish. And God could not simply give us a taste of these capacities and after that destroy ourselves. So we know that we are bad and poor and vicious and evil to some extent, but we also have goodness in ourselves. We also have virtue. We also have hopes and faith and talents and capacity to do good. And since we cannot develop everything in this life, in this present life, God would be very insensitive, destroying us or eliminating us before we could accomplish everything that we are destined to accomplish. That would not only not make sense, but that would also be morally very questionable or even impossible for a loving God. So this was a very strong argument for the Enlightenment philosophers that did hold still the idea of God or the idea of a loving God, while of course other Enlightenment philosophers, especially the French philosophers, they actually opposed themselves to religion and fought religion as best as they could. Now, I would like to mention three main arguments against the immortality of the soul. They are somehow connected to the arguments for or in support of the immortality of the soul. The first argument, and this is one of the main arguments against the immortality of the soul, comes surprisingly for some from religion. According to the idea of resurrection of the bodies, we only have life and consciousness and perception and memories and feelings and sentiments while we have bodies. There is no point and no sense in speaking about disembodied souls and souls that have a full life and senses and will and intellect without bodies, because bodies is what gives a location and what individualize intelligence, what makes intelligence connected to perception of environment and therefore memories and personality and so and so and so. So as the argument goes, if we have a soul, it remains asleep and God holds it in a secret place without consciousness until the time of judgment, when after what we will have other bodies, presumably flesh bodies made of flesh, and then we could have a proper life. Now, the argument, although it comes from religion, it's a very materialistic one, and it is a very poor philosophical argument, because it starts from the assumption, the unproved assumption, that souls and spirits could not have another sort of bodies in the spirit world, and that the spiritual world had or should have no objects, no impressions to the sense, and so and so. Now, almost every philosopher, every religious thinker that hold ideas about an afterlife did not believe that our souls would be abstract and bodiless or disembodied abstract things. Actually, from Plato to modern times, including almost everyone from Catholicism to Protestantism to paganism, we will see that everyone that presented ideas about an afterlife did claim that this life would be a full life with bodies, with personality, with memories, including the memories of this life we now have in the flesh. Also, according to another branch of evidence, which is the evidence of mediumship and apparitions of spirits and ghosts, we see a massive and consistently claims that the apparitions do have hands and hair and even sex and even clothes. So every idea or even empirical evidence suggestive of the immortality of the soul comes with the idea that our souls do have bodies in the afterlife. That was also stressed by Paul himself, which is a very Orthodox Christian, I believe. And he said that we could have a sort of astral body or a psychic body or a glorious body in the afterlife. Now, according to the second argument against the immortality of the soul, evidence can be explained away very easily. So people who reject every kind of evidence in favor of the immortality of the soul, they have either psychological, sociological, anthropological, cultural, or biological ways of explaining the data away without even observing the phenomena and even caring enough to observe the data. So according to this argument, we can say, or we can suppose that everyone who has a near-death experience was actually dizzy and confused, and after this person woke up, he or she just made a story in his or in her mind. Now, while possible, it is very important to notice that this argument does not interact with the alleged evidence in support of the immortality of the soul. What we want is an argument against the immortality of the soul that engage in dialogue with the alleged cases and the alleged evidence in favor of it. Now, another third argument is actually against the notion of cosmic moral order, which is pessimism, metaphysical or existential pessimism. And it says that the world is a pretty bad place. Human beings are a pretty poor species, and therefore we could not spot any sort of moral order acting in this world. But this is also a poor argument because it does not engage in dialogue with the argument of the cosmic order, of the moral cosmic order, which it claims to oppose. Now, the argument of cosmic moral order does not say that the world is wonderful and beautiful and that everything is fine, but on the contrary, it says that this is a world of sorrow and pain and difficulty and tragedy, and we need an afterlife, or our reason demands an afterlife in order to put some order in our picture of the world, in order to make sense of our picture of the world. Now, this is a very good way to answer to such a existential argument. It's very common among poets and writers of literature, not that common among philosophers. We have Schopenhauer as an example, but on the other hand, we can also say that Schopenhauer was a very bad example of opponent of the immortality of the soul, because he had some doubts about that. Now I would like to move to some closing remarks. The arguments for the immortality of the soul are not conclusive, and we have to be very humble if we want to remain rational about it, and not to just believe and advocate in favor of our religious beliefs. We have to be very humble and remember that it's not a closed question. It's not a settled case, and still more, much more research is needed in this field about the subjects. And after remembering that it is a still open debate, I would like to remember that many remarkable philosophers, scientists, and religious leaders are now, in this very moment, addressing the subject as it has just arrived the market. So especially with near-death experiences, but also suggestive cases of reincarnation are very popular now in psychiatry, in psychology, and also in philosophy. We have, for example, a very good example, the Blackwell Companion to Dualism. And one of the greatest philosophers of our time, Richard Swinburne, is dealing with the problem of the soul and the problem of separation of body and soul, or mind and brain, for quite a long time. So I would like to thank you for your patience, for your indulgence with my language skills, and I hope it could help us to reflect on the subject and to see how rich it could be to reflect on it, or to address the problem of the immortality of the soul from philosophical perspectives. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Humberto. I think, this is a subject that we still, like you said, we still are lifting a bit of the veil, because there is so much for us to understand and to research about it, right? We had some questions here, so we are going to have to start with our questions to you. So the first one is from Kirsten. Why do you think the media, TV, movies, etc., always paint the picture that ghosts are scary?
Oh, that's a great question. Now, this is probably a psychological issue, and we, as human beings, we are used to be scary, at least slightly scared about these things, like maybe not God, but the idea of supernatural, the idea of the occult, even the words we use to describe it, they are somehow dramatized to emphasize this this emotional appeal that this idea have to us. Now we have much more apparitions of scaring ghosts in history than apparitions of saints and angels and good entities. It may be a matter of the level of consciousness that we humans do have now, and it may be more common to us to think about hell and to think about it with very, very rich details than to think about heaven. And when we see in Dante's Divine Comedy, which is a perfect example, we have many chapters to hell, and it is perfectly described in all its nastiness and in all its scariness. And when we come to heaven, to Paradiso, there's nothing much happening. People sing and they have nice discussions and they pray all the time. We have no much form. We have no much reference to anything whatsoever. So our imagination can more easily connect to the bad than to the good, which is not usual to us. We can more easily condemn vice and identify vice than we can identify and praise virtue. For example, if we analyze human beings, we see that we are condemning bad attitudes all the time, attitudes of others, of course, not our own attitudes, but we are very rarely praising and making a case for whatever happens in the direction of good. Not sure if it's a straightforward answer, but I think it's a psychological issue, an issue connected to our actual level of spiritual evolution.
And actually, this next question from Glaucio Pessoa, I think it gives continuation to what you were talking, how to dissociate in our minds Catholic concepts from Spiritist concepts. For instance, how not to treat the umbral or as the Catholic hell, or our obsessors as the devil.
I think a reasonable answer is to remember that we are still learning how to do that. We are trying to learn to think about these things on a new light, and it is perfectly normal. It's perfectly natural that we fail many times. We have to be patient. We have to be very forgiving with ourselves, because we are not only because of Catholicism, but because old religions, sometimes from 5,000-8,000 years in the past, we are used to think about the supernatural, which is something that Kardec strongly opposed himself to. We think about the supernatural as this enchanted world of mythological beings, very scary, very dark, very gloomy, and it is difficult to us, because we are not used to it, to imagine how positive, how beautiful, how amazing the afterlife could be for mature souls, because we are usually not in that category. And so our experiences are very appealing to the other direction.
Okay, we have another question here from Tanya Schwartz. How well is this research on immortality of the soul accepted in the academic world nowadays? Are the scientists who are researching it appreciated or marginalized or neutral?
This is a bit difficult to answer. It varies a lot from place to place. It varies a lot from community to community. While in Oxford, for example, I had more positive experiences with religion in academia than negative experiences. I was there for a relatively short while, but all the colleagues say that we also have strong militants against religion, or to clean the university from religious beliefs and religious activism. So it's a very interesting place. I am not very sure about the current situation in America, but I could say that in Germany, for example, which is an important place for the academic culture around the world, religion is not very welcome, and theology is by law is imposed to the universities. The university have to have theology as a chair, because different from other countries, Germany is not by law a country without religion. It is officially Christian, and the state has a duty to provide education about religion or on religion. Now, the problem is that this process was detrimental to religion. In France, the situation is different, but there is also a opposition to religion as a matter of principle, and very few people do stop to hear to the arguments or to read the arguments. Many people have automatic answers, sometimes very dogmatic, sometimes very naive answers to the alleged evidence. But things are slightly better now than 20 years ago. I could say that the positive thing is that not positive because these subjects are being more accepted in academia, but people are open to the debate. Even people who oppose themselves to the idea of immortality of the soul, they are hearing carefully to the arguments, and they are meditating about that, and they're answering to them in a more serious way. Now, Brazil, of course, is an important place. We are among the 4 or 5 nations with greater volume of research on spirituality and religion.
So another question that we have from the Spiritist group of New York: what are the steps we need to take nowadays to bridge philosophy and religion?
Well, that's a difficult question. Well, philosophers usually believe to be what philosophers believe to be wiser and the smartest attitude is not to answer difficult questions. So I won't be very wise now, and I will try to give some answer to this very difficult question. But first, we could say that we have a myth that was constructed in the last 150 years about the clash or the conflict or the opposition between science and religion. It's a myth that is very persuasive, and it was very influential in the history of the West specifically, and especially in the turn to the 20th century. And according to this myth, science was rational and was based on evidence, and religion was completely irrational and was attached to superstition or linked to superstition and magic and so and so. Now, while sometimes it is true, it is many times false, and this propaganda or this myth ignores the fact that Isaac Newton and Galileo and Leibniz and, well, Descartes, Bacon, Robert Boyle, John Locke, all the founders of science were extremely religious men, so religious that we can hardly believe we could be more spiritual and more religious than they were. Now, if this is so, how is it possible to separate science from religion or philosophy from religion, as they were opposed feuds and contradictory to each other?
Okay. We have only two more questions, okay? The next question, João, if you can put it there, please, is from us. How to conciliate the idea of immortality when, as a rule, we still have such a narrow and immediate view of life?
Great question. Now, this is the main problem, probably. We live material lives. We are prepared, or we are conditioned by evolution to respond to material and immediate concerns like defending our lives, looking for food, searching for food, and securing a good place, a good position in the group, in society, reproducing. And therefore, our main concerns when we are not meditating, when we are not reflecting, when we are not reasoning, our main concerns are these automatic concerns that have much to do with evolution and with the fact that we have bodies made of flesh and we have to care about them. And there's nothing bad in it, that there's no problem with that, but we have to move forward. We have to grow forward from this basic roots in instinct to a life of sentiment and reason. And we are still in the middle of the process. So it's natural that it doesn't feel normal, or doesn't feel easy, or doesn't feel comfortable.
Okay, and the last one. How does the Spiritist philosophy compares with other philosophies of the time of Kardec?
Well, I will try to answer very briefly because it demands a long time to explain. I have been writing about that. Unfortunately, it's all in Portuguese, but other people are trying to make academic research on that, or historical analysis of that. We could quote or refer to Lin Sharp, who wrote much about Spiritism and modern spiritualism in English, and it's very interesting reading. But basically, we have some naive assumptions that Kardec took Spiritism out of his hat, or that he invented everything out of or from scratch, or that it felt on him like Moses' tablets, and this is the in the bad sense of the word, the religious part of us, the superstitious part of speaking. What Kardec actually was, and what he actually did, was to make very rigorous and intensive research on this evidence, and he based himself on the knowledge of his time. He was very familiar with Enlightenment ideas. He was very familiar with positivism, which was sort of philosophy of science of the time, the philosophy of evidence, the philosophy that pointed to evidence as the greatest part of the search for truth. He was obviously also Christian in a very non-denominational sense of the word, like his master Pestalozzi, uh, who is also a very big reference, a very important reference to understand the intellectual track of Kardec. But we can say that he was a thinker of his times to some extent, and he was a thinker much ahead of his times to another extent. But considering that he was a thinker of his times, he was slightly romantic. He was a rationalist. He was a little bit of a positivist, and he was in the general atmosphere of enlightenment still.
Thank you so much, Humberto. Obviously, we will want you to come back again and talk to us in the near future. And thank you, everyone, for having with us during this beautiful talk and so enlightening talk that Humberto Schubert gave to us. So, may you all have a good afternoon. And as always, we are going to end our presentation with prayer. So we ask you to follow us. And it's a prayer of gratitude for everything that we have just received, for all the enlightenment, for all the knowledge that can help us in making sense of life and in making better choices for our day to day lives. So we thank all the good spirits and our Heavenly Creator for this opportunity, and may we have many more to be together again. So thank you, everyone, and I see you soon.
I thank you too.